Hi, my name is Nancy Saxton Lopez, and I'm here with my good friend Ken Vecchio. The two of us have worked together for a long time, and we wrote a book, The Pet Loss Companion, that came out in 2013. It was a labor of love for us. And now we have our Facebook Live presentations. And tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about guilt.
Yeah, great to see you, Nancy. And we're going to cover some basic categories in our discussion. We're going to talk a little bit about what guilt is and why it's just something that's a normal part of life and certainly a normal part of grief. We're going to tell some stories about circumstances where loss brings on a lot of guilt. Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk about kids and why this is an important topic if you're a parent and there's the loss of a pet. And we're also going to talk about how incredibly painful it can be when, as a human being, we make an error. We make an error, and the death of our pet is the result of that. So we'll talk a little bit about circumstances where that's the case. And I'll start and just say a little bit about the fact that guilt is normal. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think that guilt is fundamental, and you may differ in your perspective on this, I'm not sure, but I feel like it's fundamental to relationships, to connections with other human beings and with our pets. And in fact, I feel that guilt is essential. And if we don't have some degree of guilt, we're probably going to act as lone actors too much of the time. We're not going to feel accountable. We're not going to feel responsible. And so I believe it's very normal and natural for us to experience a certain degree of guilt, not something that we should just push aside and say, we're not ever going to take this seriously, or we're going to try to turn our backs on it. And I also think that if we're a person who doesn't ever experience guilt, that there's actually a diagnostic category.
That's right.
For that, right? And that's sociopath.
Yeah.
That's somebody who doesn't have concern about others, who only acts as though other people and other living things are tools for them to use.
That's right.
And they tend to end up feeling very alone, feeling very angry, feeling very, very frustrated by the losses that they've experienced. And it's just it's not a good thing to live your life and not experience any guilt at all.
Of course. And guilt is probably one of the hardest emotions to work with in grieving. Obviously people are sad, people are angry, people, are yearning, people are depressed, but guilt's the one emotion that people have the hardest time with. And it is a normal grieving emotion, as we're talking about.
And I feel that many times the people who experience the greatest depth of guilt are also the people who have gone so far in terms of conscientiousness in caring for their beloved animal companion. And I was just mentioning to you before we went live the story of this couple who would come to the group, and they talked about how their dog had hip dysplasia for a long time, and they were taking their dog for hydrotherapy treatment at about 45 minutes distance, a 45-minute drive from their home, 2 or 3 times a week for a very, very long time. And they were racked with guilt at the fact that their beloved dog had to be euthanized at a certain point where a whole bunch of different illnesses conspired to make their life miserable. And it was just really striking to me that these were people who had done so much, who had been so attentive, who had been so caring. And here they were with this, just sort of struggling with grief.
Yeah, we had quite a few people, unfortunately. Some of them didn't come to the group because, of course, with that kind of potential accident, they were too embarrassed. but someone who had accidentally, backed up and killed their dog, or someone who actually was a caretaker of the lover of her dog, caretaker of her dog, took her first vacation and the dog died while she was on vacation. Or, different accident. I mean, one young couple had moved into a home, opened the door, dog got out, got hit by a car. So, all of these things, they felt, or a man who unfortunately just forgot his dog was in the car.
Yeah.
Unfortunate things happen. And yet the guilt with that can be astronomical because of
Well,
really they
yeah. I remember people who called and asked what the other group members, how the other group members would receive them
right,
because they had left their dog, and I think it was actually two dogs in this case, in the back of the car and had forgotten them, as some people have done with children as well,
sure.
right? And they asphyxiated. And I remember saying to them that I really hoped that they would come because the group would welcome them with the understanding, and certainly you and I would welcome them as well, with the understanding that we make mistakes all the time, that human beings make mistakes, and that we can't let it destroy us. And it, as it was, those particular couple who I'm thinking about did not come. I think it was just too much for them to
they were too nervous.
Risk. They were too nervous about it. But, like you said, we've had people who have made mistakes. I remember there was one very young couple who had gone hiking with their dog, and they let their dog off leash when they were hiking. And they happened to be near at a live train track. And their dog got run over by a train. And they supported each other very, very nicely in the aftermath of that. And I think that was very instructive for the rest of the people there to see, look, we love each other. This is something that we did regularly. We know that it was something that our dog loved to run, when we were doing our hiking, and they worked through it. They talked to each other and they got through it, and they used the group too, which was a very wise thing to do, to broaden the circle and come and talk about how pained they were and how riddled with guilt they were.
And how to get support with that.
Yeah.
I don't think that there were too many people in the history of us doing the group that didn't have guilt. And they felt they had, especially in euthanasia decisions, they felt either they waited too long and the animal suffered, or they did it too soon and something else could have helped their animal live longer. And so there was this battle in them all the time about, I should have done this, I needed to do that, why didn't I see it? How come that happened? Why I should have gone to another doctor. I should have gotten that X-ray. I should have done all of these things. And so there's really no answer to that, because
there isn't
to go through.
Yeah, the availability of euthanasia introduces a great benefit in ending suffering, but it also introduces a dilemma for so many loving pet guardians. So there's such a dilemma just for that reason. It's like and the way that I think about it is, you're very, as you said before, you're very unlikely to leave the death of your animal companion feeling guilt-free. It's very unlikely. If you love them and cared for them and they meant a lot to you, you're probably going to feel some degree of guilt. And
of course. I mean, even what I just said, opening the door, the dog gets out, the dog gets hit by a car. The guilt, I shouldn't have why was I at the door then? Why did, we had issues with one young woman who was at a dog park. And she was holding her dog, and a little girl came up to her and she put the dog down, and another dog came over and killed her dog. So those unfortunate things, I mean, it's heartbreaking, and it was certainly really difficult, a group at that point, and everyone was really like, wow, we feel for you. It wasn't your fault, because people would take that as, and like, you're going to go into talking about kids, it's my fault. I did this.
Yeah.
I should not have let my dog down.
Yeah. Yeah. Or even one of the things that I know you've discussed is the question of whether or not a pet knows that they're dying.
Yes.
If they know that they're dying, then is there something that we should be doing to offer some kind of consolation or support or something to ease that understanding? And the idea that I'm left with is you could never do enough for, we can't eliminate whatever fear there might be. But I know you've talked about that.
Well, we talked about it because I think people come in and they absolutely believe that their animal knew that they were going to die. And talking to veterinarians over periods of time, and they say, and from that perspective, what they say, look, the animal picks up on your feelings. They pick up on how you're acting, but they don't literally know that that's what's going to happen, because dogs and cats the animals don't think that way. They don't think future. They don't have that interpretation. So I think that's helpful for people, because they really believe that taking their dog or their cat or any other animal to be euthanized is, they already know that that's going to happen, but that's not what happens. The other thing that I want to point out too, is I think it's important, is that when they say, I've done this, or I don't want to make this decision, I don't want to be God, this is on me. This is a responsibility I took, and I can't deal with it. But I think part of that has to do with telling them, you're giving your animal a gift to not suffer anymore. The disease is killing them.
Sure. That you're ending the suffering. And the thing about this whole question comes down to whether the animal is getting enough pleasure out of living to outweigh the pain, the distress, the fear, that the infirmity, old age, or injury is bringing to them. And that's the big question. And so much of dealing with the guilt that surrounds these kinds of decisions really is something that you just have to kind of keep walking through, right? And talking to other people about, if that's the way you manage your feelings, talking to yourself, doing the things that help you to relieve stress. So for some people, it might be making sure that you exercise regularly, or that you process your feelings in whatever way. You play music, you do artwork, you do whatever helps you to keep going and express and acknowledge your feelings.
Well, and that goes into when you have a very ill animal, and you and I have had ill animals over periods of time. The anxiety also, there's a guilt that's there, because are you doing the right thing? But there's an anxiety because, is this the day, or is the next day, or when do I have to make a decision? When is that time going to come? Is it going to be in the middle of the night? Well, or when am I going to know? Now, there is a quality of life scale that is available online that I think for some people would really help them kind of sort out when that decision could be made for euthanasia. But it doesn't take away the anxiety that people start to feel as their animal starts to really decline.
It's so much of that final decision making, I think, is best done in collaboration
With your vet.
with your veterinarian, with other people who you have very close connections with, certainly people who respect how much this means to you. And that's maybe a family member, it may be a partner, it may be a dear friend, depending on what your life situation is. But this kind of decision making, I think, is best done collaboratively
Yes,
and
of course.
talking about how you're feeling about it, talking about and letting in the best counsel that you have, letting it in. I mean, I know some people came to the meeting and they would say that they were being told that it was past time
Right.
to let their animal go, to ease their suffering through euthanasia. And they didn't do it because they needed so desperately to hold on to them. And now they were feeling, they were feeling very, very badly about that. So much about guilt too is forgiveness. So much about how to move with it is to just try to be gentle with yourself. Just try to acknowledge that we do the best we can.
We can only do the best we can.
Yeah,
I think I want to also point out, because I was pulled into this when I during my internship getting my veterinary social work certificate, that couples would not agree. So one
sure.
was able to say, I think that we should euthanize, and the other one said, I can't do that right now. And so that is a real social work thing in veterinary practices, because the vets and the vet techs don't have that kind of time to really sit with a couple and work that through.
Right.
But it can be excruciatingly difficult, because they both have to be on the same page.
Yeah.
It's
And there can be so much conflict
yeah.
that comes if that isn't worked through as much as possible beforehand.
Hmm.
Beforehand. I mean, the way that I think about that in general, and it's a very broad stroke, is that if one person can't let go, then you probably need to spend a little more time before moving forward with euthanasia. It's the kind of thing that you can't take it back once it's done, and you don't want to be seen as the person who forced the issue.
Yeah, one couple in particular, she didn't want to make the decision because she felt that her husband would blame her.
Uh, uh,
So that was a 4 or 5 hour thing,
yeah,
trying to work it through with them, because the vet was saying, it's time. I mean, the animal's suffering. So we got there, but it did take a while.
and of course, in a couple relationship, what you just described would be the the present moment in a long-standing pattern
Yeah,
of
of the couple.
conflicts.
Right.
And
Exactly.
so this just gets added in to questions about, do we trust each other? Do we give each other enough support in the way that feels supportive? And those are the kinds of things that I think are really key to understand, that everything that happens is built on everything that came before.
Yes.
And
That
that certainly is true for a situation like this. And it's also true that this kind of situation is going to heat up
right.
whatever kind of tensions might be there. Why don't we talk about kids a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Because it can be such a challenge for kids when there's a death of their pet, because kids of all ages tend to feel overly responsible,
Responsible.
right? Overly
Their
responsible.
fault, you know? Everything is their fault. So, especially when you get even into young kids that have magical thinking, So the dog may be very sick, or the cat, they don't understand that. The cat dies, maybe it was me, you know?
Yeah, it was, and it can be totally the 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 thinking can be, as you said, totally disconnected
from the reality.
from even the care of the pet. So they can be thinking something like, well, I have not been doing my homework.
Right. So I'm
and,
being punished.
I'm not a very good boy, or I'm not a very good kid. And this is what happened as a result, even though, have absolutely
It's
no
nothing to
connection.
do. Right.
So one of the things that we've always talked about is it's important to tell your kids very explicitly, even if they don't mention it, to tell them, it's very common for kids to feel responsible for bad things that happen around them, particularly in their family. And so the death of our cat, our dog, our horse, our whoever, you had nothing to do with that. They died for, and you described what they died from and why this was the end of their life. And then you just reinforce that if you're thinking that, I'm not saying that you are, but so many kids do,
That's
that it just makes sense to put this out there.
It's important to put it out there.
Yeah, you got to let it go. You got to try to let that go, because it's not your fault. It's not anybody's fault. It's just what happened.
Right.
And very important. And I feel like this is something that it's so useful for parents to give to their children.
It's important for parents all along to bring their children into the obviously older kids into decisions too. They want to, a lot of times parents want to protect their kids, and so they don't really tell them things because they think they don't want to hurt them. But in the end, it's really better, especially for kids that can understand, teenagers, middle school teenagers, that they could be brought into those decisions.
Sure. And everything that happens in the life of a family is training or being a mature adult. And so everything about getting an animal companion, nurturing them, taking care of them throughout their life cycle, and then being with them being there when their life ends. All of these are great and important learning experiences. And it's important for parents to help their kids through that. You can't shield your kids from life. You can't shield them from reality,
It's very important for them to also demonstrate, because they're the role models, demonstrate their pain themselves, because otherwise kids can look around and say, well, if they're not upset about Rover dying, are they going to be upset about me?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's absolutely okay to have some emotional crying or being upset or being sad around your kids, so that they understand that they can be that way. They can express themselves.
The role modeling is always we're always our kids' fundamental primary role models, and something we should never let out of sight, I think. And that goes on throughout all the years of our life and their life.
You've done a lot with parenting, but it's important for parents to be able to nurture their kids through this, but also it's what they do more so maybe than what they say. The kids' experience of the family, of how parents are, of what they do, of how they interact with one another, I think has a great impact on how kids, develop, right?
Sure. It's all the way that I think about it is that our kids are absorbing us.
Yeah, right.
They're absorbing, they're watching, they're taking in, they know far more about us than we think they do.
Mm-hmm.
They're observing us in ways that are really serious, impactful. I mean,
Right.
really, they and when it comes to guilt, I think it's okay to talk with your kids about how you're feeling and how you're managing the way you're feeling and how you're moving forward. And one of the most important things that you can tell your kids is that you're getting help. If you are very burdened with guilt or sadness or hopelessness,
That's all okay.
yeah, that you're getting help.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this conversation today, what kind of thoughts would you like to leave?
I think what we talked about the parenting is really important as far as kids go. I did have a colleague years ago, and when she was a kid, she and her family had a dog, and all of a sudden the dog was gone, and the family said, "Oh, well, it was better for, Fluffy to be on the farm." And she found out as an adult that they had actually euthanized their dog. So, I mean, she was really upset. She was
Yeah,
pissed off.
yeah,
So, what parents do is important. Guilt is a normal reaction. We don't want to be consumed with it, obviously. So, it's important to talk to somebody about that, talk to a therapist, come to a group. But it's normal to have guilt around death and around loss.
yeah. To me, when you talk about kids, one of the most important things is to consistently help them navigate reality,
Yeah.
to tell them what's real, to not try to protect
No
them from
fantasies.
things like loss or their own feelings, to certainly not, if they are feeling very guilty about something they did that maybe was harmful to their pet, or their guilt is not at all realistic, to help them through that, to
Yeah.
talk through it, but not to denigrate their feeling, not to tell them you shouldn't feel that way, nor should we ever tell ourselves that. I mean, one of the things I think is just so important is that, look, if you're feeling guilty, that's okay, that's valid. Just keep going, and
Take care
one
of
of the
yourself.
take care of yourself. One of the things that I
Mhm.
always like to think of when I think about loss and grief is that grieving is the process of taking news, really unwelcome news, and emotionally chewing on it, if you
Right.
will, until it becomes older news.
Mhm.
And the feelings are not so pressing, they're not so painful. They're still going to be there, they're still going to come and go. And that's what the process is, and that's what we deserve to do, and we deserve to just kind of keep going and realize that we'll get through it. We'll get through it.
That's a really good analogy, because then at some point I would say to the group or the person, I hope that at some time you can forgive yourself. You can't take it away, but we hope that you can.
Yeah. So Nancy, it's been great talking with you. We will be back next Thursday at 6 p.m. and we'll look forward to sharing with you then. And in the interim, if you have questions or comments,
Yeah,
things you think
please,
would be
please get in
important for
touch
us
with
to
us.
address, we're happy to hear those.
Yes.
So good night and great
Bye.
talking with you.
Take care.